Selamat siang rekan-rekan media. Atas nama RedHat Indonesia, kami mengucapkan banyak terima kasih atas kehadirannya di acara RedHat Forum Jakarta 2020 Media Briefing pada siang hari ini. On behalf of RedHat Indonesia, we would like to say thank you for our media friends who joining RedHat Forum Jakarta 2020 Media Briefing. Dan seperti rekan-rekan ketahui, Red Hat selaku penyedia solusi open source terkemuka di dunia, tiap tahun menggelar acara Red Hat Forum yang menjadi wadah bagi organisasi ataupun perusahaan di Indonesia untuk mengeksplorasi langkah dan strategi open source paling inovatif dalam rangka mencapai tujuan jangka panjang maupun masa depan bisnis mereka. RedHat Forum Jakarta kembali digelar dan kali ini secara virtual sebagai bagian dari RedHat Forum Asia Pasifik 2020. Nah, pada sesi kali ini telah hadir di tengah-tengah kita narasumber dari RedHat. Terlebih dahulu kami akan perkenalkan. We would like to introduce our spokespeople today. The first is Ben Hansel as the General Manager Southeast Asian Market RedHat Asia Pacific. Good afternoon, Ben. Thank
Good
you
afternoon.
for joining the session. And Pak Ruli Maulani selaku Country Manager Red Hat Indonesia. Selamat siang jelang sore Pak Ruli.
Selamat siang Bu Erni, selamat siang teman-teman media.
Ya, sudah hadir di tengah-tengah kita. We have 10 media participate in this Red Hat Forum session. And we also have one guest, Pak Ono Purbo, as the local open source enthusiast. Pak Ono dan rekan-rekan media, kami ucapkan terima kasih sudah bergabung di acara sore hari ini. And without further ado, we would like to start our event today. Seperti biasa, kepada rekan-rekan media, nanti yang ingin bertanya bisa dipersilahkan untuk mengisi di chat box, dan kami nanti akan sampaikan pada saat Q&A session. Jadi agenda kita hari ini nanti akan ada presentasi dari Besok, dilanjutkan kemudian dengan pemaparan dari Bapak Ruli Maulani, dan dilanjutkan kemudian dengan sesi tanya jawab. Without further ado, please welcome Ben Hansel to present Asia Pacific Red Hat Forum. Please welcome. The time is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to do a quick sound check that you can hear me clearly. Is my voice okay?
Yes, perfectly all fine.
Okay, wonderful. I've just been having a little problem with my computer and my screen monitor at the moment, so that's great. Ladies and gentlemen, and sorry, now just one quick check. We don't have an interpreter. Is that correct?
No, but Ibu Erni from our agency side will also be sharing some highlights of the presentations later. So she's there. She's always there to do the local.
Okay, great. No, wonderful. I was just wondering if I had to break in between sentences. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending today as we prepare for innovation of the future. This is certainly something that Red Hat is very well known for, and is part of our overarching philosophy with regards to our annual forums that we typically run in person in Jakarta and across the ASEAN region. Unfortunately, we can't do that this time in person. We've been running it virtually for the past couple of days, and normally we have awards with customers on stage, and then we have situations where we speak to the media such as yourselves. So as is usual, we're doing this virtually. I'm doing this from home, so hopefully one of my children won't run in behind me, or one of my dogs come and sit on my lap, but we'll see how this goes. So thank you very much for joining with us. Next slide, please. So one of the themes that we have for this Red Hat Forum over the past couple of days is what we call From Here to Anywhere. And the basis of that is because our interactions with customers, and particularly in places like Indonesia, we have really noticed a shift in mindset and adaptability and resilience in thinking about how does a business and a government operate in a world where you physically can't be together. And as we've all known, there's been restricted movement orders that have come in and have been released and relaxed, and then they come back in again. And the world of digitization has only really made that more prevalent and more important for organizations and governments to master. I was sitting with the Malaysian group earlier today to a similar audience, and we had one of the local banks COOs speaking to the media, and he was saying exactly that the role of digitization has only been exacerbated and prioritized because of the need for connection through the fact that physical connections were not there. So we certainly have a view of how open source and openness improves resilience and agility, so organizations can have that organizational resilience and be adaptable and agile in this very, very fast changing way of how to operate. Red Hat has undergone the same sort of situations. And then, as usual, our philosophy is about openness unlocks the world's potential, and open source has been the largest, I would argue, bastion and example of the fastest rate of innovation that the world has ever seen. It is incredible to think of the intellectual property that is available to everybody because of the culture of openness, and that openness driving innovation, which is at the heart of Red Hat, to help drive effectively, the growth and increase that we're seeing in the Indonesian and ASEAN level. Next slide, please. So from an Indonesian perspective, and I think it's just helpful if we sort of set the context to what we're seeing at a macro level of Indonesia as it stands today, and how we're thinking about helping organizations and governments go from here to anywhere and have that resilience and adaptability. And if we look at Indonesia, certainly there's been a large contraction as stated by the PSBB. Movement orders have really sort of restricted that, and we think about, we get our data sources from your central bank about the decline in GDP. But with that said, that's really more we see as a contraction, a short, sharp contraction, but then the ability to continue to innovate and rebound as your government continues to push forward on its Innovation Indonesia Ministry of Finance's paper that was released in March. In areas about photonics, bio, nanotechnologies, advanced materials, and then obviously with ICTs being a really, really foundational one to drive and accelerate things to be connected and delivered. Now, Red Hat is in a very unique, we think, in a very particular and unique situation where we are the software platforms, if you will, that straddle both on-premise and public cloud systems to create and enable that digitization, which is really driving software and connection. And then with obviously your Industry 4.0 roadmap is still on path and is on charter to continue to help industry become that 4.0 competency, which is all around digitization. And then, the macro picture is cautiously optimistic from the Ministry of Finance, reported in earlier this year that Indonesia continues to embrace digitization with an estimated 150 billion in growth over the next 4 to 5 years. So we're really quite upbeat about what's going on in Indonesia and helping organizations build in resilience and adaptability. Next slide, please. When we look at the particular industries that have been hardest hit versus ones that have been open to more opportunities, I guess, or had a positive impact or effect from COVID. Obviously, the telcos have had very, very high demand given people stay at home and the need for connectedness and talking and interaction through data. Governments and then education and healthcare is obviously has increased. The thing that's one of the things that's particularly unique, or not unique, but it's particularly noteworthy about our market in Indonesia, government and finance and telco are the biggest three sectors there, particularly finance and insurance. And you can see that they've had moderate impact. And what's more important is we're seeing that the rate of prioritization of digitizing their services has only increased and not decreased, and building in things like business resilience and continuity planning to make sure that their services are up and running, even if they're not a tier 1 service in banking and finance. So we see really a really positive opportunity continues to present it to us in Indonesia. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yep, yeah, great. So the other thing that's particularly noteworthy that we have observed, and this is not unique to Indonesia, but more broadly across Asia Pacific, is the research is telling us that businesses are very, and governments as well, actually, interestingly, are very focused on that customer experience and attracting and also, really more importantly, retaining customers and having good customer experience. You're a customer, I'm a customer. We all have good and bad experiences with our suppliers and the products and services that we consume. It's not a week that goes by where I'm sometimes not getting quite short of frustration at one of the service providers because it's not delivering what they said they would, or their experience through particularly digital, the digital experience with that, particularly through one of these, is not up to what my expectations are. So in a world where we physically can't be together, this is even more prevalent, and through phones and omni-channel is more prevalent that experience is given a heightened sense of priority. And so we feel very, very positive about Red Hat's role in providing brilliant software platforms and tools to deliver and help organizations deliver that great customer experience through better digital services. Next slide, please. But the reality that our data is also telling us, and this is a report we did with Harvard Business Review last year, surveyed almost about 700 or so respondents, and Harvard has good access to fairly senior levels across the globe. The effectiveness of people's ability to execute on these programs or these digital strategies is only sitting at about 13%. So there's a lot of organisations, and particularly in Indonesia, to improve on that experience. And whether it's a developing nation that's very broad like Indonesia, or it's a fairly small country, very small country like Singapore, or an emerging market like the Philippines, the demands that people have are exactly the same. Really, the expectations are the same. So that 13% demonstrates there's a lot of work to be done to further improve the way you're delivering software, which is a digital experience. Next slide. And the barriers to that, we see, and this is not particularly new or incredibly insightful. It's fairly standard stuff, and that is the barriers to that are around culture, process, and technology. Now, previously, people would call culture people. People are our greatest asset and they're our greatest constraint, ironically. But culture to us, and I think it's very important to clarify what we mean by culture, because personally, I'm hearing a lot of culture now, culture talk from various vendors, but it's a nebulous, ill-defined term. And culture, what we mean by this is how people work together to get things done. And we've been talking about this for at least 5 or 6 years, but really focused really pointedly in the last 3 years or so, is culture from our perspective is taking open source, which has a very distinct culture of how things are done, how innovation is done, and bringing that to the enterprise, to our customers and government and ecosystem. Because when you look at what open source has done and how it's disrupted and how it's this amazing circus of innovation, it's how do you bottle that and enable an organization to capture that magic and put it into their people, which is the culture. And the processes and the technology follow that as well. And so obviously, particularly around processes, how things get done, with the culture is people doing things together in a way that is constructive, productive, and continuously learning. And then technology is obviously, how to rebuild and improve and use cutting-edge technology to deliver great effect. Next slide, please. So they're the constraints that largely we see. So with that said, I wanted to just particularly make this pertinent to two particular major industries that are front and center within Indonesia. And the first is if you can go to the next slide, with regards to banking. Now, Indonesia is, the fifth most populous nation in the world, got tens of thousands of islands, has a very diverse group of people, has until recently had a strong GDP, had a growing sophisticated market, and so banking, like government services and telecommunications, is a foundational piece of infrastructure to support the growth of a nation. And the banks that we're dealing with, they're all sort of the classic brand names that we're dealing with there in Indonesia. We see just the continuation of banks building highly resilient, open, interoperable, containerized platforms to support the magic of banking. Now, whether it's front office, if you can just think of a bank has kind of classically three main groups. There's front office or multi-channel, which is classic digital apps, webs, those sorts of things, ATMs. Middle office, which is where you've got a lot of very process-centric risk mitigation, loan origination, credit scoring processes and systems, and then you've got right at the back your core systems, which is your classic general ledger and your banking and your cash sort of systems, and some of your fraud and detection systems sitting in the back, or systems of record. Now, the banks have done a great job on the front end, and that's continuing to evolve and mature. But it's those middle and back office systems that are really yet to be what we call API'd, built into a sort of a microservices application architecture to run on a container system that it can horizontally scale. And that is foundational to support a bank's ability to provide brilliant digital banking, frictionless banking, customer journey-oriented banking, rather than forcing a customer through a bank's clunky systems and building an ecosystem around that. So we feel really positive, and we've got great examples of how we're helping the banks in Indonesia and across ASEAN continue to build great front, middle, and back office systems. Next slide, please. The second one is around telecommunications, and I can't underserve or understate how transformational this is in telecommunications. Like what Red Hat and open source did for Unix systems, that is going now into the network of a telecommunications organization. And so you've all heard of 5G and IoT and extreme edge computing that is foundationally being driven by telecommunication companies transforming their networks, which were clunky, complex, and siloed systems that were baked into a device, to now it being driven by open source, running on commodity infrastructure, commodity servers that you buy for, $5,000, running Red Hat Enterprise Linux or Red Hat OpenStack or Red Hat OpenShift Container Platform, running network services which were 10, 15 years ago incredibly bespoke and siloed and unique, and then being able to deploy that out into what's now known as edge computing and 5G network. This is fundamentally transformative for a country like Indonesia, and it's called the Open Network, the Open Transformation Network, and Red Hat is in a beautiful position and has got brilliant customer references around the world that demonstrate the ability for organizations to scale out their network as they transform it from proprietary to an open network architecture. And this is really, really interesting for telcos as they transform their own business model as well, that ushers in. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to just really close up with is the network services that we see for the telcos is it's not just so much about the transformation of the network and doing things like microservices-based cloud-native sort of network applications that they're deploying on that were traditionally very clunky and siloed, having edge and hybrid cloud models to deploy this and then support things like IoT and sophisticated analytics closer to where, say, the decision service needs to be, doing it under a regulatory framework. We see that we are a real enabler for helping telecommunications companies enhance and transform their business model. And I don't mean to overstate that. It is fundamentally about helping them transform their business model, going from here to anywhere, because they have a network that is software driven and highly flexible for them to be able to have resilient and adaptable services in a time to market that in previous years has never been seen before. From years to literally weeks, it can transform because it's driven by software, and we see that as a very, very prominent and exciting space for us in Indonesia. Next slide, please. And some of the numbers that are coming, say, from like IDC, just demonstrates the fact that organisations like banks and telcos are becoming high-performing software delivery organisations to deliver new services much faster, and some of the target state competencies that they're expecting to get, for instance, deploying new software into production on a weekly basis. By 2024, 40% of organisations will be doing that. In order to do that, you need things that we supply, that Red Hat supplies, because you can't do that with yesterday's software, yesterday's people skills, and yesterday's processes. All right, next slide. So I think I might, do I hand this over to you now, Buddy, Ruli? Is this your part, or do you want me to keep going?
I think this is still yours. I'm the innovation work.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, folks, I'm just about to finish here. So let me just sort of wrap this up. Next slide, please. So, Red Hat's view about how we can help organizations go from here to anywhere, because we're a software plumbing tool, if you will, with the open source model, the hybrid cloud or the multi-cloud is here to stay. It is, as we see for the foreseeable future, there is a high demand for running systems like a telco or a bank on a on-premise and in the public cloud model. It's not one or the other. And yes, while public cloud is growing at a very rapid rate, the thing is that if you just look at the way systems are designed, you can't put everything in a public cloud for a myriad of reasons. And so businesses and governments are really pursuing a hybrid cloud model. And the data is very, very clear about that. So if I can just go to the next two slides, you can just pass the next one because I'm conscious of time here. Next one. So just go back one slide there. Sorry, one slide. Yeah, so what that means is you need to have an open source strategy, because the cloud would not have exist and would not exist today in the form it has without open source. So let me just say that again. The cloud as we know it today, even at all, would not have existed without open source. And so open source and what we provide, which is like open source plumbing tools, operating systems, infrastructure platforms, development tools, automation tools, that's all like what we call platform automation plumbing tools that enable an organization to build, develop, test, deploy, and scale on a hybrid cloud model. So we feel really positive about Red Hat's role in pursuing that, and the data showing that. And there's just next slide, please, just to close this out. If I can leave you with three things with the hybrid cloud philosophy that Red Hat and Red Hat strategy is. Hybrid cloud infrastructure is here, and it's here for the foreseeable future. That needs a standard operating platform that straddles both on-premise and public cloud. building applications that are highly dynamic and highly scalable, otherwise known as cloud native microservices based. So as applications and systems are modernized and banks and telcos are doing this, that needs a hybrid cloud platform to do it, and you need cloud native development tools. And then you need to manage this complex set of infrastructure and applications across this multi-cloud and automate it, ruthlessly automate it. So Red Hat is in a really interesting and I think sweet spot to execute, and we are executing on this three-pronged strategy to help organizations innovate, have resilience, and be incredibly adaptable. So with that, I'll hand over to Ruli to talk about some awards that we're about to announce. Thanks, Ruli.
Silakan Pak Ruli. Oh, masih mute ya Pak Ruli.
Thank you, Ben. Terima kasih Bu Erni. Selamat sore rekan-rekan media, selamat sore Pak Ono, selamat sore rekan-rekan dari Bening juga. Senang sekali hari ini kami bisa melakukan sedikit sharing kepada rekan-rekan semua. Untuk yang sudah mengikuti Red Hat selama beberapa tahun belakangan, pasti tahu setiap tahun kami mengadakan apa yang namanya RedHat Forum, ya. Dan pada RedHat Forum itu pula lah kami memberikan Innovation Award kepada perusahaan-perusahaan inovatif di Indonesia yang menggunakan teknologi enterprise open source dari Red Hat untuk melakukan inovasi dan transformasi di perusahaannya masing-masing. Dan juga dengan rekan-rekan media semua. Namun tentu saja kami harapkan itu tidak mengurangi value dari apa yang akan kami sampaikan ini dan award yang kami berikan kepada perusahaan tersebut. Untuk tahun 2020 kami memberikan Innovation Award ini kepada, silakan slide selanjutnya. Next slide please. Kepada CIMB Niaga. CIMB Niaga kami berikan award untuk Innovation Award 2020 ini untuk kategori Cloud Native Development dan Digital Transformation. Seperti rekan-rekan media sudah ketahui, CIMB Niaga merupakan salah satu bank top 10 di Indonesia yang sudah ada di market selama puluhan tahun, dan tentu saja sudah melayani para pelanggannya dan nasabah di Indonesia dengan baik selama itu, dengan juga menawarkan beberapa produk dan layanan yang cukup inovatif. Apa yang membuat Red Hat di tahun 2020 ini memberikan Award Innovation ini kepada CIMB Niaga? Jadi seperti rekan-rekan media sudah ketahui, market di Indonesia untuk consumer banking tentu saja sangat kompetitif, ya. Dan banyak juga kompetitor baru yang masuk di luar dari perusahaan finansial, non-financial institution, yang mendisrupsi consumer banking services di Indonesia. Dan strategi dari CIMB Niaga adalah bukan hanya sekedar meluncurkan sesuatu layanan atau sesuatu jasa keuangan atau perbankan dengan membeli suatu produk dan meluncurkannya, akan tetapi sesuatu yang menurut kami sangat fundamental dan layak untuk kami berikan apresiasi adalah visi dari Bank CIMB Niaga tersebut untuk melakukan semua development dari aplikasi tersebut in-house atau dibikin sendiri, ya. Nah, tapi untuk bisa melakukan itu tentu saja banyak sekali gaps yang ada di bank tersebut, baik dari sisi people-nya, prosesnya, dan teknologinya, ya. Dan ini yang kami bantu dan kami coba address bersama-sama dengan rekan-rekan dari CIMB Niaga untuk mencoba merem up baik dari sisi skill set people-nya, dan oleh karena itu kultur daripada cara mereka bekerja, proses-proses yang ada, dan teknologi platform yang digunakan. Ya. Yang kami lakukan adalah kami dengan apa yang kami sebut dengan Red Hat Innovation Lab, kami duduk bareng bersama rekan-rekan dari CIMB Niaga untuk jangka waktu yang cukup lama, untuk menularkan atau bekerja bersama-sama sharing terkait best practices untuk agile methodology dan DevOps ya. Jadi konsultan dari Red Hat bekerja sama dengan teman-teman dari CIMB Niaga, bersama-sama kami membangun suatu kultur ya dan proses dan juga teknologinya dengan menggunakan teknologi open source dari Red Hat dan lebih spesifik lagi Red Hat OpenShift untuk mempermudah teman-teman dari CIMB Niaga untuk melakukan deployment dan development aplikasi secara secure ya. Dan ini yang menurut kami sangat layak untuk diapresiasi, yaitu kami bersama-sama bukan hanya membangun aplikasinya, tapi seolah-olah seperti kami sama-sama belajar memancingnya atau belajar memasaknya, bukan hanya beli makanannya ya. Jadi itu yang sangat unik dari journey CIMB Niaga kemarin, dan tentu saja hasilnya adalah sekarang platformnya sudah tersedia dan people-nya juga sudah memiliki kapabilitas untuk melakukan perubahan secara cepat terhadap demand yang mungkin ada di market, dan itu bisa dilakukan secara cost efficient dan cepat. Produk yang dibeli atau dikerjasamakan pada saat itu adalah yang pertama container platform kami, OnnoCenter, dan juga layanan Innovation Lab dan Consulting dari Red Hat. Slide berikutnya. Next slide, please. Ini ada kutipan dari Ibu Yeni Siswanto sebagai Head of IT Bank CIMB Niaga. Seperti yang sudah kita sampaikan tadi, yang ingin dilakukan itu betul-betul sesuatu yang transformasional, ya. Jadi bukan hanya membeli sesuatu barang atau produk untuk kemudian diimplement dan diluncurkan, akan tetapi ini betul-betul secara fundamental merubah kultur cara bekerja, metodologinya, prosesnya, dan tentu saja ada teknologi foundation-nya yang kami tanamkan di sana. Sehingga teman-teman di Bank CIMB Niaga mampu untuk melakukan apa yang disebut dengan continuous integration dan continuous delivery pipeline menggunakan DevOps di atas platform yang agile. Impact-nya adalah untuk consumer banking application atau consumer facing application yang mereka luncurkan itu akan dengan mudah diupdate ya untuk menjawab demand dari market atau keinginan dari bisnis untuk addressing kebutuhan-kebutuhan atau tren-tren yang ada di market, sehingga mereka bisa maintain share of wallet-nya consumer banking di tengah gempuran kompetisi baik itu dari traditional player maupun dari fintech company. Jadi kalau kutipannya di sini disebutkan bahwa Red Hat membantu CIMB Niaga untuk future proof ya kemampuan mereka untuk berinovasi. Itu sharing kami dari Innovation Award 2020. Dan next slide, I think we are finished, right?
Ya.
Ya, oke. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Ben, as well as Pak Ruli for the great presentation. Dan selanjutnya kita ikuti sesi tanya jawab. Coba nanti pada akhir sesi ini untuk merangkum pemaparan dari Ben Hensel, kami akan sampaikan summary dari presentasi beliau. Mungkin bisa menambah background untuk teman-teman media mengenai apa yang sudah dipaparkan. Nah, selanjutnya kami persilahkan rekan-rekan yang ingin bertanya. Tadi Pak Ruli juga sudah memaparkan mengenai pengumuman dari Red Hat Innovation Award Indonesia yang dimenangkan oleh CIMB Niaga dan juga achievement yang diraih terutama untuk award ini. CIMB Niaga meraih untuk Cloud Native Development dan juga Digital Transformation. Mungkin bisa memberikan gambaran kepada rekan-rekan media mengenai implementasi dari Red Hat bagi CIMB Niaga di Indonesia khususnya. Dipersilakan rekan-rekan yang ingin bertanya.
Ono.
Pak Ono mungkin?
Iya, Ono nanya deh.
Ya Pak, silakan.
Thank you, terima kasih Bu Erni, Pak Ben, Pak Ruli. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you. Sorry, I don't have any camera. I use computer, PC, Linux. No camera attached.
No, no problem, Pak.
Sorry. So anyway, I fully agree with you guys about the agility, cloud, and so on. My problem is not that. My major problem in the field is the people, the human factor. Can you share with us how to convince, how to like make a mind shift of those people on in adopting your the technology, especially the container, Docker, Kubernetes, and so on. I have very hard what problem to convincing people about this. Most of people, their mindset is still like infrastructure as a service, very much infrastructure, not containerized yet. Okay, not microservice. They don't know what microservices is. So I'm facing, that's my major problem. That one, how to shift their mindset. The second one, uh, can you give us some what roadmap maybe on how to prepare the human factor, the human resource, to be able to what to adopt this technology? What kind of human we need for this kind of technology? So basically, those two questions, very simple question actually, but I'm having a lot of problem with that. Thank you, terima kasih, Pak Ben, Pak Ruli, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe Pak Ben, you
Yeah, I
can
think
first.
Ben can start, and then I'll add in a little bit of
Yeah, and then Pak
specific
Ruli can add.
twist. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually, I guess maybe because we live and breathe containers and this idea of application modernization towards a more what we would call a lightweight or cloud native microservices model. We actually to some degree almost can't struggle to keep up with the demand
Oh,
for enterprises in Indonesia to use this technology in a constructive and productive way. The demand and for knowledge and understanding, we're holding webinars and workshops, and we've been doing it virtually now, obviously because of COVID, on a very sort of consistent rolling basis. And there's just a lot of demand for knowledge and understanding of how to use this. So while there would be certainly, I would suggest probably a more traditional and less technically savvy organizations or institutions or communities that don't know what a microservices application architecture is and why that fits perfectly within a Linux container, and that needs to be orchestrated through something like a Kubernetes component. I think the level where we're dealing with is we're really got a lot of demand and interest for application and infrastructure modernization to use containers because of the incredible operational efficiencies from it. So unlike a VM, virtual machine-based architecture or infrastructure, that containers can reduce the footprint of storage, memory, compute by upwards of 50, 60, 70, 80% collapse reduction, which is phenomenal. And then because of your architecting an application in a more componentized way known as microservice architecture, an organization like a bank can release a new feature like on a mobile app without taking out the whole banking app or the whole system, and do it in a safe and reliable way. And that gives them incredible agility and adaptability to release. So I think it's a case of us continuing to educate and guide the market and the demand and help unpack some of the mystery and benefits around this. But we're certainly seeing there's a lot of demand and interest for it at the spaces that we play in. In terms of the people and building that, finding those people, I'll hand that over to Ruli.
Maybe I can give you some idea. I was I'm not make very clear to you guys what I'm dealing with. I was at the military headquarters this morning actually. So you are looking at those kind of institution, and when I speak about the containerized cloud, they have no idea at all. So I'm dealing with those. So I agree with you in private sector, in banking, yes, the demand is most likely very high. But in the other side of the world, they don't know what I'm talking about. So if you have some idea on dealing with this kind of situation, I would greatly appreciate. I'm dead basically. Thank you, Pak Ruli, silakan.
Pak Ruli bisa
Terima kasih Pak.
menambahkan dan juga memberikan
Ya,
summary dari yang pemaparan dari Ben.
betul.
Ya.
Oke, ini terima kasih Pak Ono atas pertanyaannya ya. Jadi memang yang tadi disampaikan Ben dengan yang ditambahkan oleh Pak Ono tadi saya setuju ya. Jadi tidak bisa pukul rata Pak ya terkait familiarity maupun appetite dari tiap-tiap industri sangat berbeda ya. Jadi kalau kita bicara pengalaman saya sendiri misalnya 5 tahun setengah yang lalu saya join Red Hat dan dari awal kami sudah evangelize hal-hal terkait hybrid cloud, platform as a service, microservices, container platform dan lain sebagainya. Dan pada saat itu 5 tahun yang lalu ketika saya menjadi speaker di event-event, ketika saya ngomong
barang
hal
ajaib ya.
tersebut, itu banyak tatapan nanar ya, tatapan kosong dari para audience yang bingung ngomong apa orang ini.
Lu ngomong apaan?
Akan tetapi saya melihatnya paling nggak di 2 tahun terakhir itu sudah sedikit berubah Pak ya. Paling nggak ini pengalaman pribadi saya.
Setuju sih.
Tapi memang ada industri-industri seperti misalnya mungkin manufacturing ya atau spesifik di government mungkin defense masih seperti itu. Akan tetapi kami lihat pun bahkan di government contoh misalnya di Kementerian Keuangan, seperti di pajak, perbendaharaan, kemudian juga di BKPM misalnya ya, kemudian juga di apa namanya beberapa kementerian seperti Kumham, itu mereka sudah mulai embracing microservices, container platform dan lain sebagainya. Memang pekerjaan kita masih panjang Pak, masih banyak yang lebih banyak yang belum daripada yang sudah gitu ya.
Saya perlu bantuan amunisi sih. Aku perlu bantuan amunisi dari Anda-Anda nih. Saya perlu bantuan amunisi.
Siap Pak, siap. Boleh Pak, boleh. Ya kita sama-sama ya. Artinya ini kan kita bicara ekosistem ya. Kita bicara ekosistem, kita bicara apa namanya role masing-masing yang bisa kita perankan di sini. Dan tentu saja kami butuhkan semua ya community seperti Pak Ono, dari media seperti rekan-rekan yang hadir, dari kami sebagai prinsipal, dan tentu saja dari pengguna yang sudah ada sekarang. Dan ini tentu saja, ini kan seperti bola salju Pak ya, semakin dia bergulir, volumenya semakin bertambah, semakin besar, maka dengan sendirinya itu seperti jadi magnet kan, dia semakin atraktif terhadap talenta-talenta yang ingin belajar dan tertarik ke dunia ini. Dan kami beneran melihat bahwa memang sudah trajektorinya tuh sudah eksponensial ya dari 3 tahun yang lalu ke saat ini gitu. Dan ini sesuatu yang cukup encouraging kalau saya lihat. Memang masih banyak sekali karena kita mulainya dari low baseline ya. Masih banyak sekali yang perlu dilakukan. Nah, tetapi saya sih yakin ya, apalagi dengan tren yang sekarang seperti ini, dan tanpa tanpa kita harus pungkiri juga cloud player yang global ya, yang hyperscaler itu juga kan mereka mendorong ke arah sana juga ya dengan kemudahan mereka menawarkan service-service di atas cloud service-nya, customer pun bertanya-tanya, saya mungkin belum ready to go to cloud, tapi kalau saya pengen memiliki cloud-like experience di on-premise itu gimana caranya? Nah, ini satu-satunya cara kan hanya dengan platform as a service
Betul.
ya Pak ya, tidak bisa hanya dengan
Ya.
IaaS gitu. Jadi hal-hal seperti ini yang menurut saya sudah melakukan tren yang positif dan tentu saja kita tetap butuh kerjasama ke depannya untuk meningkatkan lebih lagi adopsi daripada container microservice DevOps di Indonesia.
Oke, thank you. Terima kasih banyak.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Ono.
Sudah terjawab ya Pak Ono. Nanti kalau
Ya.
sekiranya masih ada, bisa dilanjut pertanyaannya
Ya.
Pak Ono.
Siap.
Okay, thank you Pak Ono. So for the next question is from Ibu Lili from Info Computer. Ibu Lili asked about Bu Lili already saw the open source case study from banking industry. So maybe she missed the slides about the best practices from telco and government industry in Indonesia. Maybe you would to share about this, Pak Ben or Pak Duli.
So maybe since it's Indonesia specific question, I can take. Jadi kalau kita batasi konteksnya hanya Innovation Award aja ya. Kalau Ibu Lili ingat tahun lalu kayaknya hadir juga ya. Itu tahun lalu kami berikan awardnya itu kepada BCA dan Telkomsel. Ya, betul ya. Tahun sebelumnya lagi kami berikan ke Bank BTPN dan Perbendaharaan Negara, ya, Departemen Keuangan, Direktorat Jenderal Perbendaharaan Negara, Departemen Keuangan Republik Indonesia. Jadi hanya dalam konteks Innovation Award pun sebenarnya udah ada tuh contoh-contoh institusi pemerintahan, telco yang mana mereka betul-betul menggunakan teknologi open source untuk melakukan sesuatu yang sangat fundamental ya, berubah. Saya elaborasi sedikit ya. Kalau Telkomsel itu kita itu powering mereka punya digital core, ya, digital core di Telkomsel. Buat teman-teman yang menggunakan layanan Telkomsel, buat kita kerasanya apa sih? Nah, kerasanya itu kalau teman-teman media punya aplikasi My Telkomsel, ya, My Telkomsel, itu running on OpenShift, itu running on teknologi open source dari kami. Ya. Untuk ngapain itu My Telkomsel? Silahkan dicoba nanti. Itu basically semua yang dibeli paket, ngecek pulsa, transfer pulsa, ngasih hadiah paket ke orang lain, browsing paket-paket yang ada dan lain sebagainya, itu semua dilakukan via My Telkomsel. Itu contohnya dari telco. Kemudian kalau kita bicara government atau public sector, jadi saya ambil contoh dari pemenang 2 tahun yang lalu, Perbendaharaan Negara ya. Perbendaharaan Negara itu running private cloud ya, di atas solusi open source untuk aplikasi sakti, sistem aplikasi keuangan tingkat instansi. Jadi buat untuk budgeting dan disbursement anggaran sampai ke level instansi yang tersebar di seluruh provinsi di Indonesia, provinsi kabupaten bahkan kalau nggak salah. Jadi jumlahnya ribuan instansi gitu. Jadi ini betul-betul sesuatu yang menurut kami yang dilakukan oleh institusi-institusi tersebut yang sangat fundamental ya, yang sangat masif dan juga menjadikan perubahan yang cukup mendasar dari apa yang mereka lakukan sebelumnya. Ini yang menurut saya contoh-contoh yang bisa kami sampaikan terkait penggunaan open source secara umum di enterprise. Terasa itu.
Oke.
Pak Ruli boleh sedikit nanya lagi Pak. Ini kelihatannya kalau yang dari penjelasan tadi Telkomsel, kemudian Ditjen Perbendaharaan dan juga CIMB ini kan fokusnya pada aplikasi ya. Itu memang penilaiannya di pengembangan aplikasi atau memang karena itu yang sedang tren saat ini atau memang itu yang masif?
Ya, sebenarnya nggak juga beli. Saya ambil contoh di level aplikasinya karena kalau buat konsumen kan yang paling kelihatan, yang paling kasat mata gitu. Tapi sebenarnya yang kami lakukan itu kan di level infrastruktur ya, di level bahasanya nuts and bolts plumbing ya, daripada tools open source yang kami rangkai untuk membantu perusahaan-perusahaan tersebut membangun aplikasi. Saya tadi ambil contoh aplikasi karena kayak kalau saya cerita tentang digital core di Telkomsel mungkin agak abstrak ya, tapi ketika saya bilang aplikasi My Telkomsel pasti semua orang tahu gitu. Jadi lebih ke apa namanya ke infrastruktur sebenarnya yang kami lakukan. Akan tetapi memang seperti contoh kayak CIMB itu yang dirasakan oleh nasabahnya ya dalam bentuk aplikasi, karena yang kita meskipun yang kita lakukan itu adalah consulting untuk inovasi ya, untuk DevOps, metodologi, proses dan culture, akan tetapi tentu saja outputnya itu dalam bentuk aplikasi. Mudah-mudahan menjawab.
Ya, makasih Pak.
Ya.
Oke. Selanjutnya ada pertanyaan dari Mas Ignus, Pak Ruli, and Pak Ben. In the social distancing policy, what is the best selling RedHat in Indonesia, and what make it best selling business growth in Indonesia during the pandemic? And maybe also Ben can add about the RedHat business growth in Indonesia or maybe in Asian market. Silakan Pak Ruli dulu atau Pak Ruli dulu kali ya?
Ya, boleh. So I can start with this. Jadi kita lihat pertumbuhannya cukup merata ya. Artinya pada akhirnya yang dibutuhkan oleh semua perusahaan dan institusi itu kan untuk terus melakukan transformasi digital ya. Dan banyak inisiatif-inisiatif yang sudah berjalan atau dalam masa planning atau perencanaan itu yang isinya sebenarnya cukup komprehensif ya, apa yang dibutuhkan untuk melakukan transformasi tersebut. Jadi yang bisa saya bilang adalah sebenarnya nggak ada sesuatu yang terlalu menonjol, akan tetapi memang kami lihat harusnya ya area otomasi ya dan optimisasi apa yang sudah ada itu menjadi sesuatu yang lebih menarik gitu. So Ben, maybe you can share from Southeast Asia perspective, like what's doing well for us in terms of this COVID-19, and what's been good for us right in this context.
Yeah, it's an interesting question actually, and the very plain answer is that RedHat is just continued to grow, you know, in double-digit rates across Southeast Asia, as we have done before, and the demand and interest of our, you know, overall architectural individual components and services still remains very strong. We actually just had our quarterly business review earlier this week for Southeast Asia, you know, and the results, you know, show good underlying growth, still strong demand and resilience. And interestingly, I think if this helps, and alludes to what I was talking about earlier for resiliency and adaptability, is that there is a definite sharper focus on organizations and governments trying to figure out how do they operate in this world of hybrid physical and virtual, you know, people working together world, just like we're having this event virtually on the web. How do you bring people together to continue to get work done, you know, these digital services and upgrade applications and systems? And RedHat has certainly adapted the way we do consulting, be it virtual and physical, because of obviously restricted movement orders, and done some pretty innovative things there to help bring people together and continue what they need to do, even if you can't physically have them in the same room. And finally, because RedHat software is designed for the cloud, by the cloud, and in the cloud, developed in the cloud largely, that is the open source model, it lends itself very much to that flexibility, portability, and openness and interoperability that's required for the distributed workforces and people that are there, be it physically in the data center or, you know, on the cloud, and having consistency there. So I'm really pleased, actually. I personally, I thought we might have taken a bit of a dip but the fundamentals are still showing high growth and high interest across effectively all our parts components, because you need all these things to get software developed, tested, and delivered, and scaled, and maintained, and operationalized.
Pak Ruli, ada yang ingin ditambahkan dari jawaban Ben?
Saya rasa cukup ya. Jadi esensinya growing-nya itu cukup uniform dan cukup masih menggembirakan. Tidak ada sesuatu yang di luar norma ya. Karena kami lihat memang momentumnya sudah bergulir dari pra-profit, dan justru sekarang banyak ya perusahaan-perusahaan itu merasa bahwa ini adalah afirmasi bahwa mereka mesti segera eksekusi apa yang sudah direncanakan di area transformasi tersebut. Gitu.
Oke, thank you. Mudah-mudahan sudah jelas pertanyaannya ya, Mas. Jawaban dari Pak Ben dan Pak Ruli. Kemudian kita lanjut pertanyaan dari Mas Desmal Mobitekno. What level of the security is required by banking system? Because we still often hear cases of the financial fraud by customer. And did they happen because of the problem in the system or in the customer side? What is the role of RedHat solution to prevent the fraud? Apakah bisa dijawab?
So Ben, you wanna take a first stab at that? Our solution around security and banking.
Yeah, in banking.
Sure. Funnily enough, I was asked this question on a radio, banking radio channel in Singapore earlier this year about that. So I think the first way to answer that question is it's not a case of if the bank will be compromised or hacked or have some infiltration from external hackers. That is inevitable. It will happen. It will always happen. And to suggest that will never happen for banks, is just patently not the case. What's more pertinent is how does a bank build a level of resiliency and security automation to be able to monitor, detect, triage, fix, and repatch systems where there has been a compromise. And that's called resiliency and building higher levels of security automation in the ever-increasing complex layers that is a bank's IT systems. Banks, as you know, have been around for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and they have a very broad array of very old to very modern technology, and a very complex set of integration of the data and the systems to do that for internal and external consumption. And the internet is only making it more externalized, so it opens to further levels of security fraud. And also, the other fraud that is an intrusion that's occurring is internal, with white-collar crime, people who are doing malpractice within a financial institution who are employees, and having the checks and balances and security, restricted security access to systems and processes around that. So RedHat's strength around this, and it's not only RedHat, it's a multi-layered factor of how an organization architects its systems, puts in processes, and has a level of policies that reduce the level of risk but build in a level of constant monitoring, identification, and then triage. So I'll sort of close with this and then hand over to Ruli. RedHat's view is we have, I would argue, the highest levels of security features built into our